All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome, Sean, to another episode of Cryptonomics. How are you doing?
Morning, Bobby. Yeah, good. In our new office, so even better than last week. Can't
Nice,
complain. How's things
nice.
also?
Very good as well. For the listeners, I don't know. Obviously, we chat about Revix and their move to the new offices often. So I'm happy that you guys are in. But yeah, there's a lot to talk about today. So for all our listeners and viewers, strap in, get a pen and paper. We're going to get pretty deep today. And just remember that you can pause and rewatch. So let's dig it in. Obviously, very quickly, I like to just touch on the markets. Bitcoin sitting around 53, 50, 43, 44. It's a bit choppy, but all markets look a bit choppy. We spoke about it last week that everything was up, but I think the best word I can use right now is choppy. Just your quick insights into the current markets.
Yeah, the altcoins have done exceptionally well. I mean, you're looking at the likes of Avalanche, Solana, Cardano. I mean, they've had a phenomenal week. So I think still a decent bounce because remember, we saw a very big broad market sell of cryptocurrencies, stocks, you name it, and the market seemed to bounce up quite aggressively. And we've sort of held that bounce so far. And it's, sort of in these periods that the sort of breakout or breakdown really is really crucial. So, the direction of the market from here on out, I imagine that you're going to see pretty high correlation. I don't think you're going to see stocks going one way and crypto going the other. There's been some big developments, some of which we're going to get into today. I think Russia seemingly withdrawing from Ukraine and all the aggravation that's sort of come about from that. That's a big step forward. I mean, the UK had pretty decent job figures that came out yesterday. I mean, that then sort of impacts sort of this inflation/interest rate story, certainly within the UK. And then I mean, this feels like a lifetime ago, but not too long ago, we saw the ridiculous job numbers out of the US, right? And that was well ahead of expectations.
Yeah.
So it seems like now everything's just sort of inflated, like all the news stories and all the rest, like people are just paying a lot more attention to it. And I mean, in the past, you would have a beat or a miss and there just wouldn't be an entire market reaction. But now it seems like macroeconomics and sort of politics and everything is very intertwined and it's a lot more sort of in the public sphere.
Exactly. Hence why I like the name change to Cryptonomics, just how it's intertwined. But just touching on what I like about, the fact that the altcoins are kind of uncorrelated almost, if you want to use that point. But the fact is that they're kind of going up. It just shows you that generally an altcoin holder or investor is a crypto investor that's been around for a long time already. So it's just interesting. You can kind of sense that the short-term holders, we spoke about that as well. We can see that the long-term holders kind of have their Bitcoin, but they've got their investment opportunities in altcoins. And it's quite interesting to see that in how the markets are reacting.
It is. It's fascinating. Yeah, I think a lot of guys go out and they sort of I'm going to call it addicted to crypto through the likes of Bitcoin. That's sort of the gateway drug, to follow on with that analogy. And then you sort of start exploring the altcoins. People get very passionate about specific coins and projects, which I think is only normal, but at the same time, kind of weird. Like you wouldn't be super attached to like Amazon shares or Nasdaq shares or something, but it does seem to be that way in crypto. Yeah. We've actually sort of found that out firsthand dealing with customers that are looking at our crypto bundles, because objectively you're like, hey, listen, getting a diversified sort of ready-made product, that's the way you would normally invest in stocks. Exactly. And then you'll be this guy that'll be like, no, XRP or like VeChain or whatever it may be. And you're like, fascinating, guys.
Weird. No, I mean, again, we could probably talk about that. I want to get into the heavy stuff, but it's just interesting because these altcoins are starting to show their use cases. We talk about NFTs and everything. You can actually see what their people are trying to achieve with them. But anyways, we can dive that into an altcoin episode in the near future. But I really want to talk about this massive world developments that are happening. Last week we kind of spoke about how sentiment is changing towards regulations. And the big news that's been going on, I think it's about 2 weeks now, plus minus, are the truckers in Canada that are protesting. They're calling it the freedom protests. They don't want mask mandates. They don't want to be told they need to be vaccinated. They kind of want to be free from it. And just to give context to the viewers, is that they've been blocking the roads. We've seen that kind of stuff in South Africa and around the world. They've blocked the roads. And they then started getting support from the public. And they had GoFundMe accounts and all those kind of crowdfunding things. And the Canadian government actually turned around and legalized this. You can't do that. So they pulled those accounts. So what did the people do? They started funding the truckers in Bitcoin. I mean, how incredible. The Canadian government can't turn off Bitcoin. And that is fascinating for me, that I don't know how many million, I wish I had the number in front of me, but they were able to fund themselves millions of dollars in Bitcoin. What are your thoughts on that?
No, that is phenomenal. I mean, but this is the point, right? I mean, you saw, and it's a little bit more challenging, I suppose, to do this in the likes of China, Hong Kong, etc. But you did see a similar sort of setup happen in Hong Kong after, the protests that occurred there. And this, I think, is actually the start of something a little bit bigger in Canada because, and I mean, perhaps in Australia as well. I mean, this is pure speculation. Obviously, I have no inside information on this, but you've seen a lot of tension build up within these countries where there's sort of the zero COVID policy, and the government is very much acting as sort of like, this nanny state where they're telling people exactly what to do. Like the libertarian approach to society has been thrown out the window. And like there's only up until a certain point you can do that. I mean, China's naturally done that pretty well, but they push back. I mean, the government pushes back really hard when sort of anybody doesn't toe the line or whatever. And then you look at, Australia, you look at Canada, similar sorts of societies, and there's just, this is going to continue. But this is the power really of crypto, right? At the end of the day, I'll sort of come back to Revix here. Our mission at this business, within this business, is we want to enable everyday people to manage their own wealth and to really become their own sort of wealth manager in a sense. And this is really the philosophy behind crypto. You don't need to have other people or financial intermediaries involved with your transactions. And I think, ultimately, and this is now sort of jumping the gun and moving, say, 5 or 10 years into the future, but it's not that far-fetched to start thinking, hey, maybe the bank isn't where I get money. Maybe it is my wallet. Like there isn't this intermediary that exists anymore. Just like when you used to make a call and I don't know, the operators used to be like, well, where do you want to be connected, and then connect you. Maybe that operator gets removed. I think society moves in a direction of removing friction. And I mean, it seems very much like banks are friction points. So I think we are just in a race right now. Now this is sort of getting into the weeds of crypto, but we're in a race really to bring regulation on chain. So to make sure that KYC, AML, informational sharing, because governments do, I mean, they're not going to go away and stop, wanting to know where payments have been made and all the rest.
We can get
it's just how do we make that more uniform? How does AI get involved with that? I'm sure that's a huge story, probably the biggest story in conjunction with blockchain. And it's exciting.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. And I was just thinking, like, you talk about these countries like Australia and Canada. Canada specifically are like probably the most friendliest people in the world, yet the government is coming around and calling their truckers terrorists, and you can't fund them. It's mad. It's
no, let's imagine like you just like, listen, we are now putting in a what is the Canadian term for this? It's sort of like where the government just gets to do what they want.
Dictatorship.
Yeah, and essentially the government just for the next while gets to decide exactly what they want to be doing. And you're like, but hey, listen, this is just sorry, like that sounds condescending, but it's protest. Like this isn't a war that's taking place, which is what these wars were created for. Yeah. So anyway, the government's definitely overreached there. I don't think anyone's going to debate that.
Yeah, no, 100%. But then we look at you've already kind of mentioned it, the Russia and Ukraine tension and the potential there. I read an article that even people are funding non-government organizations in Ukraine in crypto to kind of back themselves against Russian forces. I mean, please don't, I'm not a reliable source, just this is what I've read, but fascinating that these things are also happening, but also how the whole tension in that area, in that region, is how it's affecting markets and the crypto space. Because just like you said the other day, Russia opened up to the thoughts of opening up crypto in the country and whatnot. So yeah, just very interesting how these geopolitical things are playing out.
But no, it's fascinating. This is what crypto is made for, right? Sort of a payment system that isn't created or controlled by the governments, right? Because remember, the way sort of government has grown has been together with the way that banking has grown. So regulation is implemented by banks. I mean, we see this firsthand in South Africa. We're dealing with the big bank here. The bank says we need to ask, our supervisor, which is the South African Reserve Bank. But it's like that all around the world. Yeah. And that seems like a weird system to me, right? The government should be able to say, just like they do in, let's say, healthcare and so many other areas, these are the regulations. And, you as different firms, you apply, rather than we disseminate this information and we manage the regulatory framework and all the rest through banks. I mean, as an example, and again, very much looking at the crypto space, but the South African Reserve Bank has taken an internal stance on cryptocurrencies saying we do not want to promote or legitimize cryptocurrency. That's probably 1 to 5 people that have made that decision, and probably 1 to 5 quite uninformed people about making this decision. Anyway, so they've gone ahead and done that. That means that you're not seeing crypto being custodied or sort of any R&D happening within the big banks within South Africa. And there's all these silly rumors that the banks are actually looking at crypto and stuff. I mean, it's one guy sitting in a room that's been hired as a blockchain expert. There's really no sort of major developments in that space. Yeah, and that's, I guess, one of the issues that you're seeing here. So it's just amazing to actually see that there's this other system being that's created that's not anarchist, right? I mean, this is libertarian. This is like, giving people the power to manage their own money. Like, if you earn money, you should be able to spend it the way you want to be spending it, right? Within reason, of course.
Yeah, exactly. So that brings me to the next kind of theme of conversation I wanted to have. There's a lot of talk about the Bitcoin game theory that's happening outside in the world. Just to explain game theories to the viewers or listeners, is game theory is you can, compare it to a game of soccer or chess. If an opponent does one thing, you react to the other thing. It's a game. So we try and figure out how we're going to win, right? So the game theory of Bitcoin. And you're looking at these topics, that these situations around the world, Ukraine, Canada, and El Salvador. Look at all these moves that are happening. The world has been so used to what came out of Bretton Woods, the gold standards and all of the old legacy systems. We've got the G7, the G20s and everything like that. It's going to be very interesting to see how this all plays out when people start realizing the power of decentralization and, being able to not have to be bound by rules that are set by higher organizations. So you can actually maybe create your own, maybe call it the B7 or the B20. And these are countries that are a little bit more open to how crypto and the empowering of people and their wealth, like you said. So what are your thoughts on this whole game theory and what we're seeing playing out around the world?
I think it's pretty, of course it's interesting, but it's pretty straightforward here. The more adoption that occurs, the more normal it becomes, and more countries do it. This is more like sort of follow the innovator will follow the leader, really, right? And you've seen many states in the US come out saying that they are going to open up their banks to be able to custody cryptocurrency. That's happening. Lots of fintechs are actually offering crypto on their platform globally. This is growing. And this becomes sort of this like little snowball that turns into a much bigger snowball that all of a sudden turns into an avalanche, and then it is normal, right? It's sort of like the early days when, and I mean, neither you or I were there, but when you talk about sort of real digital transformation and this move to internet, I mean, there was a period where people were like, oh, forget about the silly internet thing. It doesn't make sense. And I think it's sort of like that now, right? Where people are like, oh, just forget about the silly crypto thing. This will
noise.
Yeah, exactly. It's nothing. And at some point in time, probably in many years' time, that'll then be sort of a backbone of the way society works. I find it fascinating, right? You transfer a property, and this is now a little bit of game theory, but you transfer a property right now, you've got a deeds office, like you have a physical deeds office that like have paper copies of all of the different owners and all that, like that is bizarre. Like, how's that not? And somebody can literally just go in and obviously, I think there's sort of certain mechanisms in place to prevent this, but somebody can literally go in and change this. You've seen this many times in the emerging markets. How's that not sitting on some sort of a blockchain? That's,
exactly.
That can improve.
Why it happens in that file cabinet? I mean, your deed's gone, piece of paper taken away. Crazy. But it's fascinating to see who is like we've spoken about how Russia coming on, India coming on, kind of people are opening up to the concepts of crypto and what it can do for them more on the blockchain. It's more about that technology layer that they're kind of opening up to and saying, like, cool, what does this do and how can we make it work? But talking about all of that and the game theory out there, there's one last thing I want to talk about, which is the petrodollar system. Just for our viewers and listeners, the petrodollar system was created in the 40s when America made an agreement with Saudi Arabia to say for all oil that is sold, it needs to be done in dollars. That's why we price it, oil and gold and everything is in dollars, right? But that makes a country that does that, like Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, that are very pegged to the dollar because they have to sell their oil, their commodities, their big driving force in dollars. But now what if the dollar starts losing value? We're seeing 7.5 continual transitory inflation happening, which means that their paying power that they're getting for their oil is getting less and less and less. What happens if they start also kind of taking on the Bitcoin and they start actually pricing oil in sats to countries like El Salvador and Paraguay and the countries like Zimbabwe who don't have real economies? What are your thoughts on that? I know it's a bit hectic, but just wanted to get your view on the petrodollar system and how Bitcoin can disrupt it.
Yeah, it's one of those really out there sort of opportunities within crypto. I don't think it'll happen anytime soon. And the reason I say that is really just because of the volatility within Bitcoin. Like, no matter how much of a store of value, no matter, even if governments are the ones to sort of take this on their balance sheet and this becomes similar to gold, haven't seen really sort of like gold connected to oil or other commodities. And that's not really down to like the volatility. It's just not that. That's not the way it's done. And I think with dollars, you've actually seen sort of like this mass dollarization that's happened globally, and that sort of just resulted in that being like the default. I mean, is there a possibility? And will there probably be something around like Petro BTC? Yeah, I'm sure there will be, actually, right? I mean, there'll sort of be like that trading structure, but I do think you'll have to see Bitcoin significantly less volatile, which comes about with size, with scale, with more sophisticated players in the space and all the rest. So definitely, I mean, it's an opportunity. I think it's fascinating. I think that could be something that's really interesting, especially if oil producing nation wants to accumulate BTC on their balance sheet, or an oil producing company wants to accumulate BTC on their, or I suppose it's also like sort of all the intermediaries that are involved in that process. But that'll be a massive step forward. So an exciting area, don't get me wrong. But I also think, and maybe this is, it's definitely connected to this, but it's a bit separate. We're entering this world of autonomous and it's not just AI driven, but it's very much like autonomous finance, where if I want to utilize dollars to buy Bitcoin, or I want to utilize rands to buy euros, currently you have to sort of trade, and it's clunky. You have to go from one to another if there's no trading pair, and then you have to sort of like jump over, and there's like multiple steps. There's loads of transaction fees. I mean, we are getting to a point now where you've got trading technology that's able to sort of just get you the best prices, or like, arbitrage and triangular arbitrage and do all these different things to be able to get you the best prices. And I think, sort of those like very sophisticated trading bots are actually now coming into sort of mainstream. And I think that's something that's going to happen more and more. So this idea of trading pairs, funny enough, and I mean, I heard a really interesting podcast on this the other day, they may start falling away, because the idea of a trading pair means that there's no other way to sort of get to this particular area. So I mean, over the next few years, I potentially see that happening. And then the idea of a dollar-backed asset, or a dollar-based asset, or Bitcoin-based asset, all of that falls away. So also just really out there sort of opportunity. But I think potentially, in my view, that's where we'll go with this.
That's interesting. Just to kind of go to the oil conversation, specifically with the petrodollar system and everything, because I read an article that was talking about how, I mean, let's think El Salvador mining Bitcoin using the volcano energy. What happens when a Nigeria or Saudi Arabia decides to use the excess energy from refining oil to mine Bitcoin and build Bitcoin reserves from refining of oil? I mean, that's a fascinating idea. Beat inflation. You know what I mean? I don't know. It's crazy.
El Salvador could have stumbled on probably one of the most interesting revenue generating opportunities of all time if they're able to get sort of the geothermal mining and all the rest happening. I mean, that's very exportable, right? So that's something that they could land up then, offering to other countries and all the rest. So yeah, I don't know the probability of that. I don't know enough about how geothermal mining works, but definitely something interesting to look into.
Yeah, it's interesting because I say that because we know that last year Tesla and Elon Musk were like, listen, we'll only put Bitcoin again, when it's eco-friendly. So if you're reusing, excess energy, such as, refining oil, whatever, maybe you're answering those questions. But anyways, a speculative episode of Cryptonomics, just to kind of throw some spanner in the works, what's happening globally, and just kind of the conversations that are out there, just to kind of disrupt our current way of thinking and doing business around the world. Sean, thank you so much for your insights. It's always great to have you on.
Brilliant, Bobby. Thank you very much for having me on. Yeah, that was an interesting, fun episode.
Yeah, cool man. Thanks much. We'll see you next week.